They say blood is thicker than water. But sitting in that mahogany-paneled law office, watching my brother Marcus smirk as the lawyer read through my parents' will, I learned that sometimes blood can be the thinnest thing of all. When Mr. Davidson finished listing off the house, the investments, the family business, and every single asset going to my older brother, I felt something inside me shatter. But what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, and about what it means to truly inherit something valuable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sophia Chen-Martinez, and for 28 years I believed I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was the younger daughter, the one who stayed close to home while Marcus built his real estate empire in downtown Portland. I was the one who visited Mom and Dad every Sunday, who helped Dad with his woodworking projects in the garage, who sat with Mom during her chemotherapy treatments. I was the dependable one, the caretaker, the daughter who never caused trouble or asked for much. Growing up in our sprawling Victorian house on Hawthorne Boulevard, I always felt like I was living in Marcus's shadow. He was 3 years older, charismatic, and had this way of commanding attention the moment he walked into a room. Dad would light up when Marcus talked about his latest business ventures, nodding with pride as my brother described million-dollar deals and networking events. Mom would show off Marcus's accomplishments to her friends, always mentioning his corner office and his luxury condo with the city view. Me? I was the art teacher at Lincoln Elementary, the one who spent her evenings grading papers and creating bulletin boards shaped like autumn leaves. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from where I'd backed into a post at the grocery store. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Patel's bakery, where the smell of cinnamon rolls woke me up every morning at 5 a.m. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I loved my students with their paint-stained fingers and endless questions about mixing colors. The thing is, I never resented Marcus for being the golden child. That's just how our family worked. He was the achiever, the one destined for big things, and I was the supporter, the one who cheered from the sidelines. When Dad started talking about retirement and what would happen to his custom furniture business, it never occurred to me that I might be part of those conversations. Marcus was already successful, already proven in the business world. It made sense that he would take over. What I didn't expect was to be completely written out of their lives. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I was setting up my classroom for the day, arranging new watercolor sets for my third graders, when my phone buzzed against the metal desk. Elena's name flashed on the screen, and something in my chest tightened. My older sister never called this early unless something was wrong. Sophia? Her voice was thick with tears. You need to get to the hospital. It's Dad. The drive to OHSU felt like it lasted both forever and no time at all. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white, and I kept replaying Elena's words over and over. Heart attack. Sudden. Mom was already there. Marcus was flying in from his business trip in Seattle. By the time I reached the cardiac unit, Dad was gone. Just like that. The man who taught me to sand wood with the grain, who let me help him build birdhouses for Mom's garden, who still called me his little artist even though I was pushing 30, was just gone. Mom barely acknowledged me when I walked into the family waiting room. She was collapsed against Marcus's chest, sobbing into his expensive suit jacket, while he stroked her gray hair and murmured comforting words. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Elena sat in the corner, her own tears falling silently as she stared at the fluorescent lights above. I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling like an intruder in my own family's grief. Mom, I whispered, approaching slowly. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, but instead of the shared comfort I expected, I saw something that made me step back. Disappointment, as if my presence reminded her of something she'd rather forget. Your father was asking for Marcus at the end, she said, her voice hollow. He kept saying Marcus's name. I nodded, swallowing the words I wanted to say. That I'd been there just 2 days ago, helping Dad organize his tool shed. That he'd shown me the rocking chair he was making for Mrs. Patterson down the street, running his weathered hands over the smooth armrests with pride. That he'd hugged me extra long when I left, telling me he loved my new lesson plans about teaching kids to see art in everyday objects. But Marcus was the son, the heir, the one Dad was proud of. Of course, those were the last thoughts on his mind. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of funeral arrangements, casseroles from neighbors, and the strange emptiness that follows sudden loss. Mom moved through the house like a ghost, touching Dad's things but never moving them. His coffee mug stayed on the kitchen counter. His reading glasses remained folded on top of his unfinished crossword puzzle. His workshop stayed exactly as he'd left it, sawdust still scattered across the workbench where he'd been sanding that rocking chair. I tried to help, bringing groceries and offering to sort through Dad's clothes, but Mom always had a reason why it wasn't the right time. "Marcus will handle it when he's ready," she'd say, or, "We should wait until Marcus can be here for the weekend." Everything revolved around Marcus's schedule, Marcus's approval, Marcus's decisions. 3 months later, Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors said it was aggressive, that we should prepare for the worst. I immediately rearranged my life, taking family leave from school to care for her. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, the one with the faded flower wallpaper, and the desk where I used to draw for hours. Every morning, I'd make Mom her favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese and wheat toast cut into triangles, and sit with her while she picked at the food. Marcus visited when he could, usually on weekends, bringing expensive flowers and updates about his business. He'd sit with Mom for an hour or two, holding her hand while she told him how proud she was of everything he'd accomplished. Then he'd have to leave for another meeting, another deal, another opportunity that couldn't wait. I was the one who drove Mom to chemotherapy appointments, holding a basin when the nausea got too bad and helping her shower when she was too weak to stand alone. I was the one who researched experimental treatments and talked to doctors about pain management options. I was the one who slept on the floor next to her bed during the worst nights, listening to her labored breathing and praying for just a few more weeks together. But even then, even as I watched her fade away in front of me, Mom's eyes still lit up differently when Marcus walked into the room. She'd sit up straighter, pat her thinning hair, and ask about his latest projects with genuine enthusiasm. With me, conversations felt like obligations, necessary but draining exchanges about medications and meal schedules. Mom died on a Sunday morning in April, just as the cherry trees in the neighborhood were beginning to bloom. She'd been unconscious for 2 days, and Marcus had driven down from Portland to say goodbye. I was holding her left hand while he held her right, and for just a moment, I thought maybe this shared grief would bring us closer together as siblings. Instead, Marcus started talking about handling the arrangements before Mom's body was even cold. He made phone calls to the funeral home, selected a casket, and chose readings for the service without asking for my input. When I suggested including one of Mom's favorite poems, something she used to recite while gardening, he brushed me off. "Let's keep it simple, Sophia. Mom wouldn't want anything too elaborate." But I knew Mom loved that poem. I'd heard her whisper it to her roses every spring, her voice soft with memory as she talked about her own mother teaching her the words. I knew because I'd been there, present and listening, not just visiting on weekends between business meetings. The funeral was beautiful in the way that expensive things often are. Marcus had chosen everything perfectly, from the elegant floral arrangements to the catered reception at the church. People kept telling me how wonderful my brother was, how thoughtful and organized. They praised his eulogy, which focused on Mom's strength and Dad's work ethic, painting them as the perfect American success story. I gave a shorter speech about Mom's love for her garden and Dad's patient teaching, about small moments that had shaped who they were as people rather than what they'd achieved. A few people cried, but most seemed eager to get to the reception where Marcus had arranged for professional catering and an open bar. After the last guests left and the dishes were cleared away, Marcus, Elena, and I stood in the empty church fellowship hall. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and someone had forgotten to turn off the coffee maker, which was now brewing its third pot of burnt-smelling coffee. "Mr. Davidson wants to meet with us next week for the will reading," Marcus said, loosening his black tie. "Thursday at 2. I already confirmed with his office." Elena nodded, exhausting, visible in every line of her face. She'd flown in from Denver for the funeral and needed to get back to her own family, her own responsibilities. "Will it take long?" I need to reschedule my flight. Shouldn't be complicated, Marcus replied, glancing at me. Dad was always pretty straightforward about these things. I wanted to ask what he meant by that, but something in his tone made me hesitate. There was a certainty there, an assumption that maybe I should have recognized as a warning. Instead, I just nodded and helped fold up the extra chairs, grateful that at least we'd have one more family meeting, one more chance to feel connected to Mom and Dad through their final wishes. The week between the funeral and the will reading dragged by in slow motion. I stayed in the family house, partly because I couldn't bear to leave yet, and partly because someone needed to water Mom's plants and make sure the place didn't feel completely abandoned. Every morning, I'd make coffee in Dad's favorite mug and sit at the kitchen table, where we'd shared thousands of meals together. Every evening, I'd walk through Mom's garden, deadheading the roses and pulling weeds from between the lavender bushes. The house felt like a museum of my childhood, filled with memories but strangely empty of life. Dad's workshop remained untouched, tools hanging in perfect order on his pegboard, the half-finished rocking chair still clamped to his workbench. Mom's sewing room still smelled like her lavender perfume, with fabric scraps organized by color in clear plastic bins. I found myself picking up random objects and holding them, trying to absorb some essence of my parents through touch. Dad's favorite screwdriver, worn smooth from decades of use. Mom's recipe box, with index cards stained from years of cooking. A photo album filled with pictures of family vacations, school plays, and birthday parties, all of us younger and seemingly happier. In one of the albums, I found a picture that made me stop completely. It was from my high school graduation, and Dad had his arm around my shoulders while I held my diploma. He was looking at me with such obvious pride, such genuine joy, that it took my breath away. I'd forgotten that moment, forgotten the way he'd whispered, "I'm so proud of you, little artist," as we posed for the camera. But mixed in with these tender moments were reminders of how things had always been divided in our family. Marcus's high school football trophies lined one entire shelf in the living room, while my art awards were tucked away in a box in the hall closet. His graduation photos were framed and displayed prominently, while mine were relegated to the album pages. Even in death, it seemed, the hierarchy remained unchanged. Thursday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical spring weather for Portland. I put on my one black dress, the same one I'd worn to both funerals, and drove downtown to Mr. Davidson's law office. The building was old but well-maintained, with the kind of heavy wooden doors and marble floors that were supposed to inspire confidence in serious legal matters. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in the reception area and scrolling through his phone. He'd changed out of his usual business casual into a dark suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He looked up when I walked in, gave me a quick nod, and went back to his screen. "Elena's running a few minutes late," he said without looking up. Flight was delayed. I sat down across from him, smoothing my dress and trying to calm the nervous flutter in my stomach. I wasn't sure why I felt anxious about this meeting. It wasn't like I expected to inherit anything significant. Mom and Dad had worked hard for what they had, and it made sense that it would go to Marcus, who could manage it properly and continue Dad's business legacy. But still, there was a small part of me that hoped for something, some token that would prove I'd mattered to them too. Maybe Dad's tools, so I could continue making small wooden projects in his memory. Maybe Mom's jewelry, simple pieces that I could wear and think of her. Maybe even just a letter, some words that would help me understand my place in their hearts. Elena rushed in just as the receptionist called our names, her hair still damp from the rain and her cheeks flushed from hurrying. Sorry, she panted, giving me a quick hug. Traffic was terrible. Mr. Davidson greeted us in his office, a room that smelled like old leather and furniture polish. He was older than I'd expected, probably close to Dad's age, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a kindly professor. Family photos covered his desk, and I found myself wondering about his own children, whether they felt confident about their place in his affections. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to 3 chairs arranged in front of his massive oak desk. "I want to start by saying how sorry I am for your loss. Your parents were wonderful people, and I considered Robert a good friend as well as a client." Marcus nodded impatiently. Thank you, we appreciate that. Should we get started? Mr. Davidson opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. Of course. Let me begin by reading the relevant portions of your parents' will. They updated it about 6 months ago, so this represents their final wishes. 6 months ago. That would have been right after Dad's heart attack scare in the fall, the one where he'd spent a night in the hospital for observation. I remember driving Mom there, how shaken she'd been by the reminder of their mortality. They must have decided to get their affairs in order while they still could. The will is fairly straightforward, Mr. Davidson continued, adjusting his glasses. Your parents have left the family home at 1247 Hawthorne Boulevard, along with all contents and furnishings, to Marcus Chen-Martinez. I felt something twist in my chest but kept my expression neutral. The house was worth at least $500,000 in Portland's current market, and it was filled with a lifetime of memories. But houses needed maintenance, property taxes, care. Marcus could handle those responsibilities. The family business, Martinez Custom Furniture, including all tools, equipment, client contracts, and business assets, also goes to Marcus Chen-Martinez. That made sense too. Marcus had business experience, connections, the ability to either continue Dad's work or sell everything for the best possible price. I didn't know anything about running a business, about managing clients or handling contracts. All investment accounts, savings accounts, and retirement funds, totaling approximately $1.7 million, are also designated for Marcus Chen-Martinez. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd had no idea my parents had saved so much money. Dad had always been careful about spending, driving his old pickup truck until it literally wouldn't start anymore, but $1.7 million? That was generational wealth, the kind of money that could change someone's entire life trajectory. Marcus was trying to look appropriately solemn, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He'd just inherited everything, became an instant millionaire, secured his future and probably his children's futures too. Additionally, Mr. Davidson continued, all jewelry, collectibles, artwork, and personal effects are designated for Marcus Chen-Martinez, with the exception of Patricia's wedding ring, which she requested be given to Elena. Elena gasped softly and pressed her hand to her mouth. It was a beautiful gesture, and I was genuinely happy for her, but it also highlighted what was becoming increasingly obvious. I wasn't mentioned at all, not even for Dad's tools or Mom's recipe collection, or a single photograph from their decades together. Finally, Mr. Davidson said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, any remaining assets, debts, or obligations not specifically mentioned above shall also pass to Marcus Chen-Martinez as the primary beneficiary and executor of the estate. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain pattering against the office windows. Marcus cleared his throat and leaned forward in his chair. That seems pretty clear, he said. What do I need to do to start the transfer process? Mr. Davidson set down the will and looked at each of us in turn, his expression unreadable. Well, Marcus, there are some forms to fill out, and we'll need to go through probate, but that's all fairly routine. However, he paused, reaching for another folder that I hadn't noticed before. This one was thinner, older looking, with a piece of blue ribbon tied around it. There is one more thing. Marcus frowned. What do you mean, one more thing? Mr. Davidson untied the ribbon with careful fingers, as if the document inside was fragile or precious. Your father came to see me privately, about 3 weeks before he passed away. He brought this with him, along with some very specific instructions. My heart began to beat faster, though I couldn't say why. There was something in Mr. Davidson's tone, something that suggested this wasn't just a forgotten bank account or a piece of property they'd overlooked. Robert was very clear that this was not to be opened or discussed until after the reading of the main will, Mr. Davidson continued. He said, and I quote, I need my children to understand what they're really inheriting before they can appreciate what matters most. Elena and I exchanged glances. Even Marcus had stopped checking his phone and was staring at the lawyer with full attention. Mr. Davidson opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter, several pages long in Dad's familiar, careful script. There were also what looked like legal documents, photocopies of something official, and a small brass key attached to a leather cord. This letter is addressed to all 3 of you, Mr. Davidson said, but Robert asked that I read it aloud in this office, with all of you present. He wanted to make sure you heard it together. He cleared his throat and began to read in Dad's words. But somehow, through the lawyer's voice, I could hear my father's gentle tone, his thoughtful way of choosing each word carefully. My dear children, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you've just learned how your mother and I chose to distribute our material possessions. Marcus, I hope you understand the weight of responsibility that comes with what you've inherited. That house holds 4 generations of memories. The business represents 50 years of learning to create beauty with my hands. The money is the result of decades of careful choices and small sacrifices. Marcus straightened in his chair, his expression serious for the first time since we'd arrived. But I also hope that all 3 of you understand that the most valuable things we possessed cannot be transferred through a legal document. Love doesn't have a dollar amount. Wisdom can't be deposited in a bank account. Character isn't something you can inherit like a piece of property. Mr. Davidson paused, glancing at us over his glasses. Should I continue? We all nodded, though I felt like I was holding my breath. Elena, my dear daughter, you have built a beautiful life for yourself in Denver. You found love, created your own family, followed your own path with courage and independence. You never needed our money to become successful, and that wedding ring your mother wanted you to have represents the kind of marriage we hope you continue to build with David. Elena was crying softly, pressing Mom's ring against her heart. Marcus, you have exceeded every expectation I ever had for financial success. You've built an empire, earned respect in your field, and proven that you can turn opportunity into prosperity. The inheritance you've received today will only add to what you've already accomplished through your own efforts. I could see Marcus struggling with some emotion I couldn't identify. Pride, maybe, but also something else. Something that looked almost like guilt. But Sophia, my name in Dad's voice, even filtered through Mr. Davidson's reading, made me sit up straighter. Sophia, my little artist, my patient daughter, my quiet one who sees beauty where others see ordinary things. You spent the last years of our lives caring for us. Not because you had to, but because that's who you are. You sacrificed your own time, your own opportunities, your own dreams to make sure we felt loved and supported. Tears were falling down my cheeks now, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. You never asked for anything in return. You never complained about the burden. You never resented the attention your siblings received or demanded equal recognition for your contributions. You simply loved us with the purest heart I've ever known. Mr. Davidson reached for a tissue box and pushed it toward me, but I was too focused on his words to notice. That kind of love, that kind of character, that kind of quiet strength cannot be purchased or inherited. It can only be recognized and honored. Which is why, my dear Sophia, you are receiving something far more valuable than money or property. Mr. Davidson set down the letter and picked up the legal documents. Your father has established something called the Patricia and Robert Martinez Foundation for Arts Education. The foundation has been funded with $2.3 million from accounts that were kept separate from the estate. I felt the world tilt sideways. $2.3 million. More money than Marcus had inherited? But that's not all. Mr. Davidson continued, consulting the documents. Your father also purchased a property 18 months ago, using funds from these separate accounts. A building in Cannon Beach, Oregon, that was previously an art gallery and workshop space. He handed me a photograph that had been tucked inside the legal papers. It showed a beautiful, weathered building, with large windows facing the ocean, surrounded by wild beach grass and twisted shore pines. It looked like something from a painting, too perfect to be real. The building comes with living quarters upstairs, a fully equipped art studio, and gallery space for exhibitions. It's yours, Sophia, along with the foundation funds to create an arts education program for underserved children. I stared at the photograph, unable to process what I was hearing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Mr. Davidson picked up the brass key and held it out to me. Your father said to tell you that this is your chance to teach art to children who need it most, to create a place where creativity and imagination can flourish without worry about funding or approval. My hands shook as I took the key, its weight somehow both lighter and heavier than I'd expected. He also wanted me to give you this final message, Mr. Davidson said, returning to the letter. Sophia, you have spent Your whole life believing that quiet love is worth less than loud success. You've accepted being overlooked because you thought that's what good daughters do. But I see you, sweetheart. I see your artist's heart, your teacher's patience, your caregiver's dedication. I see the way you notice details that others miss, the way you find magic in ordinary moments. I was sobbing now, ugly crying in a way that probably horrified Marcus, but I couldn't control. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone anymore. You don't need to earn love through service or silence. You have already proven, through every day of your beautiful, generous life, that you are exactly the daughter your mother and I always hoped for. Mr. Davidson folded the letter gently and placed it in front of me. The rest of this contains practical information about the foundation, the property deed, and contact information for the local lawyer in Cannon Beach who can help you with the transition. The room was completely silent, except for my ragged breathing and the continued sound of rain against the windows. Elena was staring at me with amazement, her mouth slightly open. Marcus looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "I don't understand," Marcus finally said, his voice strained. "Where did this money come from? How did Dad have separate accounts that we didn't know about?" Mr. Davidson adjusted his glasses again. "Your father was a very careful financial planner, Marcus. Over the years he made strategic investments that performed better than expected. He also received an inheritance from his uncle several years ago that he never mentioned to the family. He chose to keep these funds separate because he wanted to make sure each of his children received exactly what they needed most." "But why didn't he tell us?" Elena asked, still clutching Mom's ring. "Why all the secrecy?" "Because," Mr. Davidson said, looking directly at me, "he wanted to see how you would treat each other when you thought love and money were distributed unequally. He wanted to know if your relationships with each other were based on material expectations or genuine affection. The implications of this hit me like a slap. Dad had been testing us. He'd been watching to see if Marcus would share, if Elena would protest the inequality, if I would demand my fair portion. He'd been observing our characters under pressure, and I had failed completely. I'd sat there silently while Marcus inherited everything, accepting what I thought was my parents' judgment of my worth. I hadn't fought for myself, hadn't questioned the disparity, hadn't demanded explanations. I just absorbed the pain and tried to be grateful for whatever scraps of love remained. But maybe that was exactly what Dad had been hoping to see. Maybe my silence hadn't been weakness but strength. Maybe my acceptance hadn't been resignation but grace. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. Dad orchestrated this whole thing like some kind of elaborate psychological experiment? Your father loved all three of you equally," Mr. Davidson said calmly. "But he loved you differently, according to your individual needs and natures. Marcus, you received the family legacy and the security of traditional wealth because you have the skills and temperament to manage those responsibilities. Elena, you received a symbol of lasting love because you've already built the life you wanted. And Sophia..." He looked at me with something that might have been paternal pride. "Sophia received the gift of purpose, the opportunity to turn her talents into something that will serve others, and the financial freedom to follow her heart without compromise." I looked down at the key in my palm, its brass surface warm from my skin. Somewhere on the Oregon coast, there was a building waiting for me, a place where I could teach children to see the world through artists' eyes. A chance to create something meaningful from the love my parents had quietly saved for me all these years. But first I had to figure out who I was going to be now that everything I'd believed about my place in this family had just been turned upside down. "There's one more thing," Mr. Davidson said, pulling out a final envelope. "Your father asked me to give this to Marcus specifically, to be opened only after hearing about Sophia's inheritance." Marcus took the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines in Dad's handwriting. "Marcus, by now you know that your sister has received something extraordinary. I hope you also know that this doesn't diminish what you've inherited or your importance in our family. But I need you to understand something important. Sophia never asked for recognition. She never demanded equality. She never made her love conditional on what she might receive in return. She simply loved us with an open heart, and that's the most valuable inheritance anyone could ever receive. take care of each other. Love each other as generously as she has loved all of us. Dad. Marcus set the note down carefully and looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression had changed, softened, become more complicated than the simple satisfaction I'd seen earlier. Sophia, he said quietly, I had no idea about any of this. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and tried to find words that could encompass everything I was feeling. Shock, gratitude, grief, excitement, terror, and a deep, overwhelming sense that my life had just taken a completely unexpected turn. Neither did I managed to say. I thought they'd forgotten about me. They never forgot, Elena said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. They were just saving the best surprise for last. As we left Mr. Davidson's office an hour later, armed with documents and contact information, and a head full of plans that seemed too big to be real, I found myself walking between my siblings in a way that felt different than it had that morning. The hierarchy that had defined our family for 30 years had just been completely reshuffled, and none of us quite knew how to navigate this new landscape. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking in anyone's shadow. I was walking towards something that belonged entirely to me, something that would require all of my strength and creativity and courage to build. I was walking toward a future that my parents had quietly, lovingly prepared for me while I wasn't looking. And I was walking toward the person I might become when I finally stopped trying to earn love and started believing I was worthy of it. 3 days after the will reading, I was still sitting in my childhood bedroom staring at the brass key, wondering if the entire meeting had been some elaborate hallucination brought on by grief and stress. The legal documents were spread across my old desk, next to sketches I'd drawn in high school and a dusty collection of art supplies I'd forgotten I owned. Everything felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. My phone had been buzzing constantly since word got out about the inheritance. Apparently, news travels fast in Portland's art education circles, and somehow the story of the overlooked daughter who inherited millions had leaked from Mr. Davidson's office. Teachers from my school kept calling to congratulate me, though their voices carried undertones of disbelief and, perhaps, a touch of envy. Former college classmates I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Even my landlord, Mrs. Patel, had knocked on my door with congratulations, and what I suspected was hope that I might buy the building and let her retire. But the call that shattered my paralysis came from an unexpected source. Is this Sophia Martinez? The voice was warm but professional, with the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years teaching children. Chen-Martinez, I corrected automatically. Yes, this is Sophia. My name is Catherine Wells. I'm the principal at Seaside Elementary, about 20 minutes south of your new property in Cannon Beach. Mr. Davidson gave me your contact information, said you might be interested in discussing educational partnerships. I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Educational partnerships? Quote, I understand you're planning to establish an arts education foundation. We have 130 students here, about 40% of whom qualify for free lunch programs. Many of them have never had access to art classes, music lessons, or creative workshops. When I heard about your father's vision for your foundation, I wondered if you might consider Seaside as one of your pilot locations. The reality of what I'd inherited hit me fully for the first time. This wasn't just money or property. This was an opportunity to actually change children's lives, to give them access to the kind of creative education that had shaped my own identity as a person who saw beauty in everyday moments. I'd love to discuss that, I heard myself saying. Actually, I'm planning to drive down to see the property this weekend. Could we meet then? Absolutely. And Sophia, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but what your father created for you is remarkable. The fact that he recognized your gifts and found a way to amplify them, it's the kind of legacy most educators only dream of building. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house listening to the familiar sounds of the old Victorian settling around me. Somewhere in the walls, pipes gurgled and floorboards creaked with the weight of decades. This house held so many memories, but they all belonged to the person I used to be. The person who believed her value was measured by how quietly she could love others. That evening, Elena called from Denver. How are you processing all of this? She asked without preamble. Because I've been thinking about it nonstop and I keep coming back to the same question. How did Dad know? How did he see something in you that you didn't even see in yourself? I walked to my bedroom window and looked out at the cherry tree in the backyard, the one Dad had planted when I was born. Its branches were heavy with late spring blossoms, white petals drifting down like snow in the evening breeze. I think maybe he saw it because he was looking, I said slowly. All those years, when I thought he was focused on Marcus's achievements, maybe he was actually watching how I handled being overlooked. Maybe he was waiting to see if I'd become bitter or if I'd keep loving anyway. And you kept loving anyway. I didn't know there was another choice. Elena was quiet for a moment. You know what's crazy? I always envied how easy you made it look. The way you could just show up and take care of things without making a big production about it. I used to think you were lucky that you didn't need external validation the way Marcus and I did. Trust me, I needed it, I said with a laugh that came out more bitter than I intended. I just got really good at pretending I didn't. Well, you're getting it now. Dad's final gift wasn't just the money or the property. It was proof that he saw you all along. After Elena hung up, I found myself wandering through the house, touching surfaces and remembering moments. In Dad's workshop, I ran my fingers along his workbench, still covered with a fine layer of sawdust from his last project. The rocking chair for Mrs. Patterson sat in the corner, unfinished but beautiful in its rough state. I picked up one of his hand planes, feeling the weight of the tool that had helped him create so much beauty over the years. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine teaching children to work with wood, to feel the satisfaction of shaping something useful and lovely with their own hands. I pictured a workshop space where kids could learn that creating art wasn't just about paint and paper, but about any medium that allowed them to transform raw materials into expressions of their inner vision. The next morning, I called in sick to school. It was the first time in 7 years that I'd taken a mental health day, and the guilt felt strange and unfamiliar. But I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to transition from the life I'd been living to the life I was apparently meant to live. I drove to Powell's Books downtown and spent 3 hours in the education and nonprofit management sections, loading my arms with books about starting foundations, arts curriculum, development, and working with underserved populations. The titles felt foreign in my hands, like artifacts from someone else's expertise, but I knew I had to start somewhere. Over coffee at a nearby cafe, I opened my laptop and began researching Cannon Beach. The town had a year-round population of about 1,600 people, swelling to several times that during tourist season. It was known for its dramatic coastline, its thriving arts community, and its commitment to preserving both natural beauty and cultural heritage. The median home price was well beyond what most working families could afford, which meant there was likely a significant population of service workers whose children might benefit from free arts programming. I pulled up Street View images of the address Mr. Davidson had given me, trying to see my new property from every angle. The building sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, with a small parking area and what looked like a garden space behind it. The architecture was classic Pacific Northwest, with weathered cedar shingles and large windows designed to capture the dramatic light that made this stretch of coast famous among photographers and painters. According to the property records, the building had most recently housed the Haystack Gallery, which had closed 2 years ago when the owners retired and moved to Arizona. Before that, it had been an art school, a pottery studio, and briefly a bed and breakfast. It seemed like the kind of place that attracted creative souls, as if the building itself called to people who wanted to make beautiful things. My phone rang while I was scrolling through photos of the interior. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. We hadn't spoken since leaving Mr. Davidson's office, and I wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation. Hey. His voice was quieter than usual. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Of course. I've been thinking about what happened at the lawyer's office. About what Dad wrote in that letter. I waited, not sure where this was heading. I owe you an apology, Sophia. Actually, I owe you a lot of apologies. For years of apologies. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to explore. Marcus, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I've been replaying every family gathering, every holiday, every time Mom and Dad praised my latest business deal while you were quietly doing the dishes or helping with homework, or just being present in ways that I never bothered to notice. I could hear traffic in the background, which meant he was probably calling from his car between meetings. Even in the middle of a personal revelation, Marcus was multitasking. I always told myself that you were fine with how things were distributed in our family, that you were naturally more low-key, more content with smaller recognition. But that wasn't fair, was it? I never actually asked what you wanted or needed. I didn't know how to ask, I admitted, and honestly, I'm not sure I knew what I wanted until I got it. Dad was testing all of us, wasn't he? He wanted to see if I'd share when I thought I had everything. He wanted to see if you'd speak up when you thought you had nothing. He wanted to see who we really were when we thought no one was keeping score. I thought about this, stirring my cooling coffee with a wooden stick. What would you have done? If there hadn't been a second part to the will, would you have shared the inheritance? Marcus was quiet for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he said, I want to believe I would have. But honestly, I was already thinking about tax implications and investment strategies. I was treating it like a business windfall, not a family legacy. And now? Now I'm wondering how I became the kind of person who receives a letter from his dead father telling him to love his sister more generously, and realizes it's the first time anyone has had to spell that out for me. We sat in our respective silences, processing the weight of honesty between us. What are you going to do with your inheritance? I asked finally. I'm going to honor Dad's wishes, continue the business, take care of the house, manage the investments responsibly. But I'm also going to figure out how to be a better brother. Starting with this, whatever you need to get your foundation started, whatever resources or connections might help, just ask. Consider it my contribution to Dad's real legacy. After we hung up, I felt something shift inside my chest, like a knot I'd been carrying for years had finally started to loosen. Maybe Dad's test had worked on all of us. Maybe the inheritance wasn't just about money or property, but about revealing who we were capable of becoming when love was freely given instead of carefully earned. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I was going to drive to Cannon Beach that weekend, not just to see the property, but to stay for a while, to really explore what it might feel like to live there, to build something there. I called my principal and requested an extended leave of absence, explaining that I had some family matters to resolve. She was understanding, probably assuming I needed time to grieve, and agreed to let me take the rest of the school year off. Then I called Mrs. Patel and gave her notice on my apartment. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating, like stepping off a cliff while trusting that I'd somehow learn to fly during the fall. The drive to Cannon Beach took 2 hours through some of the most beautiful landscape in Oregon. I'd forgotten how dramatic the transition was from the urban corridors around Portland, to the dense forests of the Coast Range, and then finally to the wild, windswept beauty of the Pacific shoreline. With each mile west, I felt like I was shedding layers of the person I used to be. I'd booked a room at a small inn for the weekend, planning to spend Saturday exploring the town and Sunday meeting with Catherine Wells at Seaside Elementary. But first, I wanted to see my property, to stand in the space that my father had somehow known would be perfect for me before I knew it myself. The building was even more beautiful in person than it had been in photographs. It sat on a slight rise overlooking the ocean, with Haystack Rock visible in the distance like a monument to the power of persistence against overwhelming forces. The late afternoon light was golden and soft, exactly the kind of illumination that made artists fall in love with this particular stretch of coastline. I used the brass key to unlock the front door, my hands trembling slightly as the lock turned. The interior was larger than I'd expected, with soaring ceilings and windows that framed the ocean like living paintings. The previous owners had left it partially furnished, with work tables and easels still arranged around the main gallery space. The walls were painted a warm white that seemed to glow in the natural light. Upstairs, the living quarters were simple but comfortable, with a small kitchen, a bedroom with ocean views, and a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub positioned perfectly for watching storms roll in from the horizon. Everything smelled like sea salt and cedar, with undertones of turpentine and creativity that seemed to have soaked into the walls over decades of artistic use. But it was the workshop space in the back that made me understand why Dad had chosen this particular property. The room was set up for multiple types of art making, with stations for painting, sculpting, woodworking, and what looked like printmaking. Natural light poured in from skylights and north-facing windows, while south-facing openings provided glimpses of the garden and the ocean beyond. I could picture it filled with children, their faces intense with concentration as they discovered their own capacity for creation. I could see teenagers working on college portfolios, finding their artistic voices with patient guidance. I could imagine workshops for adults who'd always wanted to try art but never had the opportunity or confidence. For the first time since leaving Mr. Davidson's office, the magnitude of what I'd inherited felt real and achievable, rather than overwhelming and impossible. That evening, I walked through downtown Cannon Beach as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too dramatic to be natural. The town was bigger than I'd expected, but still maintained the intimate scale of a place where neighbors knew each other's names. Art galleries lined the main street, along with bookstores, cafes, and shops selling everything from local pottery to vintage clothing. I stopped at a restaurant called the Chowder Bowl and ordered fish and chips, sitting at a window table where I could watch tourists and locals navigate the evening together. Families with small children headed back to hotel rooms after long days on the beach. Couples my age strolled hand in hand, stopping to examine art in gallery windows. Older residents walked dogs and greeted each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd chosen this beautiful, isolated place as their permanent home. A waitress named Jenny, who looked to be about my age, brought my food and lingered for a moment when she noticed my sketchbook. "Are you an artist?" she asked, nodding toward the drawings I'd been making of the view from my table. "I'm a teacher, actually. Art teacher. I'm thinking about moving here." "Oh, that's wonderful! We could really use more arts education in the area. My daughter Emma is 8, and she's always drawing and making things, but there aren't many opportunities for kids around here to really develop those skills." "What grade is she in?" "3rd grade, at Seaside Elementary. Do you know it?" I smiled at the synchronicity. "I'm actually meeting with the principal there tomorrow." Jenny's face lit up. "Mrs. Wells?" "She's amazing. She's been trying to get arts programming for the school for years, but the budget never allows for it. Emma would be so excited if she knew there might be art classes coming." After Ginny moved on to other tables, I sat thinking about her daughter Emma, about all the children in this area who might be longing for creative outlets they couldn't afford or access. I thought about my own childhood, how art had been the language that helped me make sense of the world when words weren't enough. How drawing and painting had taught me to really see, to notice details and beauty that others might overlook. Maybe that's what Dad had recognized in me all along. Not just the ability to create art, but the desire to help others discover their own creative voices. Maybe he'd seen something in my teaching that I'd taken for granted. Some quality that made children feel safe enough to experiment and take risks with their imagination. The next morning, I met Catherine Wells at Seaside Elementary, a low-slung building surrounded by towering evergreens and playground equipment that had seen better days. Catherine was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with graying brown hair and laugh lines that suggested she genuinely enjoyed working with children. "Welcome to our little school," she said, leading me through hallways lined with student artwork and achievement certificates. "We're not fancy, but we have wonderful kids and teachers who care deeply about giving them the best education possible." She showed me classrooms where dedicated teachers were making magic happen with limited resources. In one room, a 3rd-grade class was studying ocean ecosystems, with hand-drawn posters covering every available wall space. In another, 5th-graders were performing readers' theater versions of myths and legends, their enthusiasm making up for the lack of costumes or sets. "This is what we're working with for art supplies," Catherine said, opening a closet that contained a few boxes of crayons, some construction paper, and a handful of paintbrushes that had seen better days. "The teachers do their best, but most of them don't have art training, and we just don't have the budget. for quality materials or specialized instruction. I thought about the workshop space at my new property, about the potential for transporting supplies and bringing small groups of children to work in a real artist's studio. I thought about the foundation funds, about how far they might stretch if used strategically to serve multiple schools and communities. "What would your dream arts program look like?" I asked. Catherine's eyes lit up. "Weekly classes for every grade level, taught by someone who really understands both art and children. Access to quality supplies so kids can experiment with different media. Maybe field trips to galleries or artist studios. Professional development for our teachers so they feel confident incorporating arts into other subjects. What about after-school programming? Summer workshops?" "That would be incredible, but probably too much to hope for." I smiled, thinking about Dad's letter, about his vision of children discovering their creative potential without worry about funding or approval. "Catherine, what if I told you that we could start with all of that, not immediately, but within the next few months?" Her expression shifted from polite interest to something closer to amazement. "Are you serious?" "I'm very serious. My father established this foundation specifically to serve underserved children. I have the resources to hire qualified instructors, purchase supplies, even provide transportation if needed. What I need is a partner who understands the community and can help me design programming that really meets children's needs." We spent the next 2 hours discussing practical details. Class sizes, age-appropriate curriculum, parent communication, space requirements, teacher training. Catherine had clearly been thinking about this for years, and her ideas were both creative and grounded in educational best practices. "There's something else," she said as our meeting was winding down. "We have a number of children who are dealing with trauma, poverty, family instability, some who are refugees or immigrants. Art can be incredibly therapeutic for kids who are processing difficult experiences, but it requires sensitivity and specialized training." I nodded, thinking about my own students back in Portland, about the children who'd used art class as their safe space, their place to express emotions they didn't have words for yet. "I'd want to make sure we're approaching this thoughtfully," I said. "Maybe starting with general programming and then developing more specialized offerings as we learn what the community needs." "That sounds perfect." "Sophia, I have to say, when Mr. Davidson first called me about your foundation, I hoped we might be able to offer a few workshops or maybe an after-school program. But what you're describing sounds like a comprehensive arts education partnership. It could transform what we're able to offer these children." Driving back to Cannon Beach that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. Not anxiety about whether I was good enough or useful enough, but genuine anticipation about what I might be able to create with the resources and freedom my father had given me. I stopped at a grocery store and bought supplies for dinner, planning to cook my first meal in my new kitchen. The mundane act of choosing vegetables and deciding what to make for dinner felt significant somehow, like a declaration that I was really going to try living here, really going to attempt building something meaningful in this beautiful, intimidating place. That evening, as I prepared a simple pasta dinner in the upstairs kitchen, I called Elena to tell her about my meetings and my tentative plans. "It sounds like you're really gonna do this," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I think I am. It's terrifying, but it also feels right in a way that nothing has felt right in a long time. Mom and Dad would be so proud." "I hope so. Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I'm crazy for walking away from everything I know to try something I've never done before?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Sophia, do you know what I always admired most about you? My stunning fashion sense? My ability to make small talk at family gatherings," she laughed. "Your courage. You might not see it that way, but you've always been the bravest one in our family. You were brave enough to love unconditionally even when it wasn't returned equally. You were brave enough to sacrifice your own opportunities to take care of Mom and Dad. You were brave enough to sit in that lawyer's office and accept what you thought was rejection without complaint. That doesn't feel like courage. That feels like being a doormat." "No, that's where you're wrong. Anyone can demand what they think they deserve. Anyone can make noise when they feel overlooked. But it takes real courage to keep showing up with love when you're not sure it's appreciated. And now you get to be brave in a different way. You get to build something that didn't exist before, something that will serve children for years to come. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window watching the last light fade over the ocean. In the distance, I could see the lights of fishing boats heading out for night fishing, and closer to shore, the occasional flash of a lighthouse keeping watch over the treacherous coastline. Tomorrow, I would start the practical work of turning Dad's vision into reality. I would research nonprofit regulations, interview potential staff members, and begin designing curriculum that would help children discover their own creative voices. It would be complicated and challenging, and I would probably make mistakes along the way. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The brass key sat on the kitchen counter, no longer a symbol of an impossible future, but a tool for unlocking the life I was finally ready to live. Outside, the waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore, patient and persistent and full of power I was only beginning to understand. The first real challenge came 3 weeks after I'd officially moved to Cannon Beach, when I discovered that good intentions and substantial funding couldn't automatically translate into immediate success. I was sitting in my new kitchen, surrounded by stacks of paperwork for nonprofit incorporation, when my phone rang with news that made my stomach drop. Ms. Chen-Martinez, this is Linda Patterson from the Oregon Department of Education. The voice was crisp and official. We've received your application for educational programming certification, and I'm afraid there are some significant concerns we need to discuss. I grabbed a pen, my hand already shaking. What kind of concerns? Your proposed curriculum lacks the required alignment with state standards. Your facility hasn't undergone proper inspection for educational use. Most critically, you don't have the necessary credentials to serve as executive director of an educational nonprofit. The words hit me like cold water. In my enthusiasm to honor Dad's vision, I'd assumed that passion and resources would be enough. I'd forgotten that the world runs on regulations, certifications, and bureaucratic processes that exist for good reasons but can feel crushing when you're trying to move quickly. What would I need to do to address these issues? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. You'd need to complete a nonprofit management certification program, hire a credentialed educational consultant to redesign your curriculum, and bring your facility up to code for public educational use. The inspection alone could take months, assuming you pass on the first attempt. After she hung up, I sat staring at the ocean through my kitchen window, feeling the weight of my inexperience settle around me like fog. Dad had believed in me, but maybe his confidence had been misplaced. Maybe inheriting money and property wasn't the same as inheriting the wisdom to use them effectively. My laptop chimed with an email from Catherine Wells, and my heart sank further as I read her message. Sophia, I hope you're settling in well. I wanted to give you a heads up that word has gotten out about our partnership, and not everyone in the district is supportive. There's been some pushback from parents who are concerned about outside organizations influencing our curriculum. There's also been some questions raised about your qualifications and whether the foundation is just a vanity project for someone with more money than experience. I believe in what we're trying to do, but we may need to move more slowly than originally planned. I closed the laptop and walked downstairs to the workshop space, where I'd been slowly organizing supplies and equipment. The room that had seemed so full of potential a few weeks ago now felt overwhelming and premature. What had I been thinking, imagining myself as someone who could create meaningful change when I'd never even managed a budget larger than my classroom supply fund? The sound of knocking interrupted my spiral of self-doubt. I opened the front door to find a woman about my age with silver-streaked brown hair and paint under her fingernails, holding a covered casserole dish. You must be the new owner, she said with a warm smile. I'm Rebecca Torres. I live in the blue house down the hill. Welcome to the neighborhood. Sophia Chen-Martinez. Thank you, that's very kind. I brought lasagna. Moving is exhausting, and I figured you might not have had time to get properly settled in the kitchen yet. I invited her in, grateful for the human connection when I was feeling so isolated by bureaucratic obstacles. Rebecca had the kind of immediate warmth that made strangers feel like old friends, and within minutes we were sitting at my kitchen table sharing coffee and conversation. I heard through the local grapevine that you're planning to start an arts education program, she said. That's exciting. This area really needs more opportunities for kids. That's the plan anyway. Though it's turning out to be more complicated than I expected. Rebecca studied my face with the perceptive eye of someone accustomed to reading people's emotions. Running into some red tape? Mountains of it. Apparently, wanting to help children and having the resources to do it isn't enough. You also need credentials, certifications, inspections, and about 6 months of patience. Well, you came to the right place for patience, Rebecca said with a laugh. Living on the coast teaches you that some things can't be rushed. The tides come and go on their own schedule, storms blow in when they're ready, and sometimes the best thing you can do is prepare well and wait for the right conditions. Are you an artist? I asked, noticing the paint stains on her hands. Among other things, I teach pottery classes at the community center, do some freelance graphic design, and run a small gallery during tourist season. Jack of all trades, master of none, as they say. That sounds like exactly the kind of diverse experience I need to learn from. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Can I offer you some unsolicited advice? Please. Don't try to build Rome in a day. This community has seen a lot of well-meaning outsiders come in with big plans and lots of enthusiasm. Some of them created wonderful things, but others burned out when they realized that real change happens slowly and requires building trust with people who've been here long before you arrived. So you're saying I should scale back my plans? I'm saying you should think strategically about building relationships before you build programs. Get to know the community. Let them get to know you. Find out what families really need and want, not just what you think they should have. Over the next few weeks, I took Rebecca's advice to heart. Instead of rushing to launch programming, I spent time exploring the broader community and listening to what people were actually saying they needed. I volunteered at the local food bank, attended town council meetings, and struck up conversations with parents at the grocery store and coffee shops. What I discovered was more complex than I'd initially understood. While many families were enthusiastic about arts programming for their children, others were skeptical of yet another initiative that might not last. Some parents were concerned about their children being pulled out of academic classes for enrichment activities. Others worried about whether free programming would somehow stigmatize their kids or create social divisions. I also learned that Cannon Beach, despite its reputation as an artist's haven, had significant economic inequality. The wealthy retirees and successful artists who owned galleries and oceanfront homes lived alongside working families, who cleaned hotels, cooked in restaurants, and provided the services that kept the tourist economy running. Many of these families commuted from less expensive towns inland, which meant their children attended schools in communities that had even fewer resources than Seaside Elementary. One afternoon, I was having lunch at a cafe downtown when I overheard a conversation at the next table that stopped me cold. I heard she bought the old Haystack Gallery, one woman was saying, plans to turn it into some kind of art school for poor kids. Typical, her companion replied. Rich lady moves to town, decides she's going to save everyone whether they want saving or not. I give it 2 years before she gets bored and moves on to the next trendy cause. My sister said she doesn't even have teaching credentials. Just showed up with daddy's money and decided she knows what's best for local children. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. They weren't entirely wrong about my inexperience, but their dismissive tone made it clear that some people had already decided I was just another wealthy dilettante playing at philanthropy. That evening, I called Marcus, needing to talk to someone who understood the strange position I'd found myself in. People think I'm some kind of trust fund baby who's treating charity work like a hobby, I told him, pacing around my living room as the sun set over the ocean. Are you? He asked bluntly. What do you mean? Are you doing this because you genuinely want to serve these communities, or because you feel like you should do something meaningful with Dad's gift? The question stung because it forced me to examine my own motivations more honestly. I think it started as the second thing, but it's becoming the first. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. But here's the thing, Sophia. You're going to face criticism no matter what you do. People who inherit money always do, especially people who try to use it for social good. The only thing that matters is whether you're committed enough to push through the skepticism and do the hard work of proving yourself. What if I'm not qualified? What if they're right, and I'm just fooling myself? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when I started my first business? I was 25, had no experience, and was trying to compete with established real estate firms that had been around for decades. Everyone told me I was too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. But you had business training, you had a plan. I had some training and a half-baked plan. What I really had was willingness to work harder than anyone else, and learn from every mistake. That's what you have too, Sophia. You have passion, resources, and the ability to listen and adapt. Those might be more important than credentials. After we hung up, I made a decision that felt both practical and symbolic. I enrolled in a nonprofit management certification program offered online through Portland State University. I also reached out to the Oregon Department of Education and asked for a detailed list of exactly what I needed to do to meet their requirements. But more importantly, I started showing up in the community as a learner rather than a leader. I attended parent-teacher conferences at Seaside Elementary, not to promote my foundation, but to understand what families were dealing with. I volunteered to help with school fundraisers, stuffing envelopes and setting up chairs rather than writing checks. I took pottery classes from Rebecca and joined a book club that met at the local library. Slowly, people began to see me as a person rather than a project. Jenny from the Chowder Bowl introduced me to other parents who shared her excitement about arts programming. A retired teacher named Margaret offered to help me understand state educational standards. Even some of the skeptics began to soften their criticism when they saw that I was willing to do unglamorous volunteer work alongside everyone else. The real breakthrough came when I met David Kim at a community meeting about budget cuts to local schools. He was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who worked as a maintenance supervisor for the Parks Department and served on the school board. After the meeting, he approached me with a proposition. "I heard you're trying to start an arts program for kids," he said. "My daughter Sarah is 12, and she's been begging for art classes since she was old enough to hold a crayon. But she's also been asking me to teach her woodworking, like her grandfather used to do." That sounds like a wonderful connection to preserve. Here's my thought. What if instead of starting with formal classes and big programming, you offered workshops that bring families together? Parents and kids learning alongside each other, creating things they can take home and treasure. The idea hit me like lightning. Instead of positioning myself as the expert who would teach local children, what if I created opportunities for families to explore creativity together? What if the foundation became a catalyst for strengthening community bonds rather than just providing services? David, that's brilliant. Would you be willing to help me design some pilot workshops? I'd be honored. And I think I know some other parents who might be interested in contributing their skills too. Over the next month, we developed a series of monthly workshops that would bring together families from different schools and communities. David would lead woodworking sessions where parents and children could build simple projects together. Rebecca offered to teach family pottery classes. A local musician named Carlos volunteered to lead sessions on making instruments from recycled materials. My role would be to coordinate the programming, provide materials, and facilitate art-making activities that didn't require specialized skills. Instead of positioning myself as the expert, I would be the enthusiastic amateur learning alongside everyone else. The first workshop was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late August. We'd advertised through schools, community centers, and word of mouth, hoping for maybe a dozen families. Instead, 23 families showed up, including some from as far away as Tillamook and Astoria. The morning began with chaos. Children ranging from 5 to 15 years old, parents who'd never touched clay before, and me trying to manage supplies and logistics while simultaneously learning how to center clay on a pottery wheel. Within the first hour, I was covered in mud, had answered roughly 100 questions about everything from kiln temperatures to local tide schedules, and was absolutely certain the whole event was going to be a disaster. Then something magical happened. 8-year-old Emma, Jenny's daughter from the restaurant, was struggling with her pottery wheel when David's 12-year-old Sarah offered to help her. Soon, older children were naturally mentoring younger ones, while parents found themselves collaborating across family lines to solve problems and share techniques. A grandmother named Rosa, who'd been hesitant about participating, discovered she had a natural talent for hand building and ended up teaching several other parents techniques she remembered from childhood art classes in Mexico. Carlos had brought his guitar and started playing softly while people worked, which led to impromptu singing and storytelling that made the whole workshop feel more like a family gathering than a formal class. By the end of the morning, families had created bowls, cups, small sculptures, and collaborative pieces that would be fired in Rebecca's kiln and ready for pickup the following week. But more importantly, they'd created connections with each other and with the joy of making something beautiful with their hands. As families were packing up their things and saying goodbye, Jenny approached me with tears in her eyes. "Emma hasn't stopped talking about this since we signed up," she said. But watching her teach that little boy how to roll coils, seeing her confidence when she helped someone else learn something she'd just figured out herself, that was more valuable than any art class could have been. David nodded, wiping clay dust off his hands with a damp towel. This is what community looks like. People sharing what they know, learning from each other, creating things that matter because they're made together. As I cleaned up the workshop space that afternoon, I reflected on how much my understanding of the foundation's purpose had evolved. Dad's letter had talked about creating opportunities for children to explore creativity without worry about funding or approval. But maybe the deeper gift wasn't just access to art materials or instruction. Maybe it was the chance to strengthen the fabric of community through shared creative experiences. That evening, I called Catherine Wells to tell her about the workshop and to discuss how we might adapt this family-centered approach for school programming. "I love this direction," she said immediately. "Instead of pulling children out of class for arts instruction, what if we offered after-school workshops where families could participate together? Or weekend sessions that complemented what students are learning in their regular classes? You don't think it's too different from traditional arts education?" "Sophia, traditional arts education isn't serving these communities well, or we wouldn't have such limited programming in the first place. What you're describing sounds like it could be more sustainable and more meaningful than anything we could accomplish within conventional structures." Over the next several weeks, we developed a hybrid model that combined family workshops with more traditional programming. The foundation would offer monthly family sessions at my property in Cannon Beach, weekly after-school programs at participating schools, and summer intensive workshops for students who wanted deeper artistic training. We also established partnerships with other community organizations. The local library would host exhibitions of student work. The Historical Society would provide materials for workshops focused on traditional crafts and cultural preservation. Local businesses would sponsor supplies and provide mentorship opportunities for teenagers interested in creative careers. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. About 6 weeks after our first workshop, I received a letter addressed to the Patricia and Robert Martinez Foundation. The return address was from Seaside Elementary, but the handwriting was clearly that of a child. Inside, I found a drawing of the pottery workshop, showing families gathered around tables with clay and tools, everyone smiling and working together. At the bottom, in careful third-grade printing, Emma had written, "Dear Miss Sophia, thank you for teaching me that art is more fun when you share it. My bowl holds my treasures now, and it reminds me of the day I helped someone else learn too. Can we do more workshops like this? Love, Emma." I sat in my kitchen holding that letter for a long time, watching the late afternoon light shift across the ocean and thinking about the unexpected ways that love multiplies when it's freely shared. Dad had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, but maybe what he'd really given me wasn't just the resources to teach art to children. Maybe he'd given me the opportunity to learn that the most valuable things we create are the connections between people, the moments of joy and discovery that happen when we risk being vulnerable together. The letter went into a special box on my desk, the first piece of evidence that what we were building was bigger than programming or curriculum or nonprofit regulations. We were creating a space where families could discover their own capacity for beauty, where children could learn that their creativity mattered, where community could be strengthened, one shared experience at a time. And for the first time since inheriting this enormous responsibility, I felt genuinely confident that I was becoming the person Dad had always believed I could be. The crisis came on a storm-lashed Tuesday in October, when I thought everything I'd built was about to collapse around me. I was in my workshop preparing materials for that weekend's family ceramics session when my phone rang with news that made my blood run cold. Ms. Chen-Martinez, this is Dr. Amanda Fletcher from Oregon Child Protective Services. The voice was professional but urgent. We've received a complaint about your foundation's programming that requires immediate investigation. My hands went numb around the phone. What kind of complaint? A parent has alleged that your workshops lack proper supervision and safety protocols. They've also raised concerns about inappropriate relationships between adult volunteers and minor participants. We need to suspend all programming until we can conduct a full review. The room seemed to tilt. Everything I'd worked for over the past 6 months, all the trust I'd built with families, all the connections between parents and children who'd discovered joy in creating together, suddenly felt fragile and threatened. Can you tell me who made the complaint? I'm not at liberty to share that information, but I can tell you that the allegations are serious enough to warrant immediate action. You'll need to notify all participating families that programming is suspended pending investigation. After she hung up, I sat in my workshop surrounded by half-finished pottery pieces and carefully organized art supplies, feeling like someone had just told me that everything I believed about myself was wrong. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Just as I'd finally found my purpose, just as I'd discovered what it felt like to create something meaningful that served others, it was being taken away by faceless accusations I couldn't even defend against. I called Catherine Wells first, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. "Sophia, I heard," she said before I could even explain. "Dr. Fletcher called the school district as well. I'm so sorry this is happening. Catherine, do you have any idea who might have made these accusations? Has anyone expressed concerns to you about the workshops?" There was a long pause. There have been some rumblings. Some parents who felt left out because they couldn't attend the weekend sessions due to work schedules. Some concerns about whether the programming was too informal, whether children were getting appropriate educational value. But inappropriate relationships, lack of supervision. We've never had fewer than 6 adults present at any workshop, and most of our volunteers are parents themselves. I know, Sophia. But sometimes it only takes one person with the right connections to make life very difficult for programs like yours. That afternoon, I had to make the hardest phone calls of my professional life. One by one, I contacted the families who'd signed up for that weekend's workshop and explained that we had to cancel due to an investigation. The disappointment in their voices was crushing, but worse was the undercurrent of worry I heard from some parents. Jenny from the Chowder Bowl was particularly upset. "Emma's been working on a surprise pottery piece for her grandmother's birthday. She's been so excited about finishing it this weekend. What am I supposed to tell her?" "Tell her the truth," I said, though the words felt like sand in my mouth. Sometimes adults have to make sure that programs are safe and properly run, even when that means disappointing people we care about. David Kim was more direct. "Sophia, is there something I should know? Should I be concerned about Sarah's participation in these workshops?" "David, you've been at nearly every session. You've seen how we operate. Do you have any concerns about safety or appropriateness?" "None whatsoever. But if someone's making accusations, there has to be a reason. People don't usually complain about programs their children love unless something's genuinely wrong." That evening, Rebecca came by with a bottle of wine and a grim expression. "I heard about the investigation," she said without preamble, "and I think I know who's behind it." "Who?" "Margaret Whitfield. She's been stirring up trouble about your foundation ever since the first workshop. She's convinced that you're some kind of outsider who's corrupting local children with your anything-goes approach to education." I remembered Margaret vaguely. An older woman who'd attended one town council meeting where I'd presented plans for expanded programming. She'd asked pointed questions about my credentials and had seemed skeptical of my responses. But why would she go to Child Protective Services? What could she possibly think we're doing wrong? Rebecca settled into my kitchen chair and poured wine for both of us. Margaret's granddaughter Lucy attends school in Lincoln City, not Seaside. She applied to participate in your workshops but was told there wasn't space because priority went to families from partner schools. Margaret felt this was discriminatory and elitist. We've never turned away any child due to space constraints. We've added sessions every time demand exceeded capacity. I know that, and you know that. But Margaret's convinced that you're running an exclusive program disguised as community service. She's also been spreading rumors that some of the male volunteers have been spending too much time helping young girls with their projects. The accusation felt like a physical blow. David Kim, Carlos the musician, and 2 other fathers had been enthusiastic participants in our workshops, offering gentle guidance to children who needed extra help. The idea that their kindness and mentorship could be twisted into something sinister made me feel sick. Rebecca, what if I can't clear this up? What if the investigation finds problems I don't even know exist? Then you fight it. You document everything you've done right. You gather testimonials from every family you've served. And you prove that your programs are not only safe but valuable. But Sophia, you also need to prepare for the possibility that some people will never accept what you're trying to do here. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. During that time, I felt like I was living under a microscope, second-guessing every decision I'd made and every interaction I'd had with children and families. Dr. Fletcher interviewed volunteers, visited my workshop space, and reviewed all of my documentation with the thoroughness of someone looking for problems. The hardest part was seeing the impact on the families who'd been participating in our programs. Emma kept asking her mother when art class would start again. Several teenagers who'd been working on college portfolio pieces had to find alternative ways to access materials and workspace. The sense of community that had been building through shared creative experiences began to fragment as people wondered whether they'd been naive to trust a program that was now under official scrutiny. I spent those weeks completing my nonprofit management certification coursework, updating safety protocols, and creating detailed documentation for every aspect of our programming. I also reached out to other arts education organizations around the state, seeking advice from people who'd navigated similar challenges. What I learned was both comforting and sobering. Nearly every successful community program faced resistance from people who felt threatened by change or excluded from benefits. The key was transparent communication, rigorous adherence to safety standards, and building broad enough support that isolated complaints couldn't derail important work. But I also learned that some battles couldn't be won through documentation and protocol. Some people would always view outsiders with suspicion, especially outsiders with resources who tried to create change in established communities. The question wasn't whether I could avoid all criticism, but whether I could continue serving families effectively despite ongoing resistance. The turning point came when Dr. Fletcher called to schedule a final interview. Ms. Chen-Martinez, I've completed my investigation, and I'll be filing my report with the state next week, she said. I wanted to discuss my findings with you first. Of course, I found no evidence of inappropriate supervision or safety violations. Your documentation is thorough, your volunteers are properly screened, and every family I interviewed expressed strong support for your programming. I felt tears of relief starting in my eyes. So we can resume workshops? Yes, with some recommendations for additional documentation and formal safety protocols. But I want to be frank with you about something else. This complaint was clearly motivated by personal grievance rather than genuine safety concerns. The complainant was unable to provide specific incidents or credible evidence to support their allegations. Quote, "Will that be noted in your report?" It will be. But I also want to warn you that successful community programs often attract this kind of scrutiny. People who feel excluded or threatened by change sometimes use official channels to express their frustration. You should prepare for the possibility that this won't be the last complaint you receive. When I called David Kim to share the news that we could resume programming, his response surprised me. Sophia, I'm glad the investigation cleared you, but I think this experience has shown us something important. We need to be more intentional about inclusion and community input. Maybe it's time to formalize some kind of advisory board that includes representatives from all the communities we serve. You think I haven't been inclusive enough? I think you've been incredibly generous and responsive. But generosity isn't the same as shared governance. If we want this foundation to really belong to the community it serves, we need to create structures that give local people more voice in decisions about programming and priorities. David's suggestion led to the formation of the Community Arts Advisory Council, which included parents, teachers, local artists, and community leaders from each of the towns we served. Instead of making programming decisions unilaterally, I began bringing proposals to monthly council meetings, where members could provide input, suggest modifications, and help ensure that our offerings reflected genuine community needs, rather than my assumptions about what people wanted. The council's first major decision was to expand our family workshop model to include more diverse cultural traditions. Rosa, the grandmother who discovered her talent for hand-building pottery, suggested workshops focused on traditional Mexican ceramics. A Siletz tribal member named Joseph offered to lead sessions on traditional woodworking and carving techniques. A group of Vietnamese families requested workshops that incorporated traditional papermaking and calligraphy. What emerged was programming that reflected the actual diversity of our coastal communities, rather than my initial vision of generic arts and crafts activities. Children began learning about their own cultural heritage, while also exploring traditions from their neighbors' backgrounds. Parents who'd felt marginalized in previous educational settings found themselves valued as cultural experts and teachers. The second major change was establishing a sliding fee scale for workshops and materials. While I'd always intended programming to be free or low cost, the council pointed out that some families felt uncomfortable accepting charity, while others wished they could contribute financially to support expansion. The new system allowed families to pay what they could afford while ensuring that no child was excluded due to economic constraints. But the most significant development came through my relationship with someone I hadn't expected to play an important role in my new life. Tom Bradford had been attending our family workshops since the second month of programming, bringing his 7-year-old son Michael every session without fail. Tom was a single father who worked as a park ranger at Ecola State Park, and he had the kind of quiet competence that made both children and adults feel safe in his presence. I'd noticed him, of course. It was hard not to notice someone who moved through the world with such gentle confidence, who could help a frustrated child solve a ceramic problem while simultaneously cleaning up spilled paint and answering questions about local wildlife. He had sun-weathered hands and laugh lines around his eyes, and he listened to people with the kind of attention that made them feel truly heard. But I'd been so focused on establishing the foundation and proving myself professionally that I hadn't allowed myself to think about personal relationships. Romance felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, while I was still figuring out how to be the person my father had believed I could become. The shift happened gradually, the way most meaningful changes do. Tom started arriving a few minutes early to help set up workshop spaces. He lingered after sessions to help with cleanup, while Michael played with other children. Our conversations evolved from practical coordination to deeper discussions about parenting, education, and what it meant to build a life in a place where natural beauty and economic challenges coexisted. One evening in early December, after a particularly successful workshop focused on making gifts for family members, Tom asked if I wanted to join him and Michael for dinner. "Nothing fancy," he said with a smile that made something flutter in my chest. "Just fish and chips at Moe's. But Michael's been asking if you might want to see the tide pools at Haystack Rock afterward. Low tides at sunset tonight." I found myself saying yes before my practical mind could list all the reasons why dating was complicated when you worked with the same community volunteers every week. Dinner was easy in the way that conversations with Tom always were. Michael chattered about his ceramic owl, his plans for Christmas gifts, and his father's promise to teach him to identify different species of sea anemones. Tom listened with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed his child's enthusiasm, while also asking me thoughtful questions about my work and my adjustment to coastal living. At the tide pools, as the winter sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Michael ran ahead to examine sea stars, while Tom and I walked more slowly across the uneven rocks. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, steadying me as I navigated a particularly slippery patch. Of course. What made you stay? I mean, really stay, not just stick around long enough to get your foundation started. You could run this organization from anywhere, hire local staff to manage the day-to-day work. I thought about his question as we watched Michael carefully examine a hermit crab, his small face serious with concentration. I think I stayed because this is the first place I've ever lived where I felt like I was becoming myself rather than trying to be what other people needed me to be, I said finally. In Portland, I was always the dutiful daughter, the reliable teacher, the person who took care of everyone else's needs first. Here, I'm still trying to serve others, but I'm doing it from a place of strength rather than obligation. Tom nodded, his eyes reflecting the last light of the sunset. I came here for similar reasons. After Michael's mother left, I needed a place where we could build a life that wasn't defined by what we'd lost. The coast has a way of teaching you that some things endure despite storms, and some things are strong enough to start over. As we walked back to our cars, Michael running ahead with pockets full of interesting shells, I realized that what I'd found in Cannon Beach wasn't just professional purpose or community belonging. I'd found the possibility of love that didn't require me to diminish myself, partnership that enhanced rather than competed with my other commitments. Tom and I began spending more time together outside of workshop settings. Quiet dinners after Michael's bedtime, weekend hikes along coastal trails, conversations that stretched late into the night about dreams and fears, and the strange courage required to build meaningful lives in an uncertain world. The relationship deepened naturally, without the drama or negotiation that had characterized my previous attempts at romance. Tom understood that my work with the foundation was essential to who I was becoming, just as I respected his dedication to environmental education and single parenthood. We supported each other's commitments rather than competing for priority. By spring, Michael had started calling me Miss Sophia, with the easy affection of a child who felt secure in adult relationships. Tom had become my closest advisor on foundation decisions, offering perspectives shaped by years of working with diverse communities and understanding the delicate balance between conservation and economic development. When the Community Arts Advisory Council suggested establishing a summer intensive program for teenagers interested in pursuing artistic careers, Tom volunteered to help design outdoor education components that would teach participants about the relationship between environmental stewardship and creative practice. Art and ecology aren't separate subjects, he explained during one planning meeting. They're both about paying attention to the world around us, understanding how systems work together, and taking responsibility for our impact on the places we love. The summer program became our most ambitious undertaking, bringing together high school students from rural and urban communities for 2 weeks of intensive creative work combined with environmental education. Participants lived in dormitory-style housing we established in partnership with the local youth hostel, took classes with professional artists and naturalists, and completed collaborative projects that addressed environmental challenges through creative problem-solving. The program's success exceeded all expectations, with participants creating art installations for local parks, designing educational materials for environmental nonprofits, and building connections across economic and cultural differences that had previously seemed insurmountable. But more importantly for me personally, the summer program represented the full realization of what my father had envisioned when he established the foundation. We weren't just providing arts education. We were nurturing young people's capacity to see themselves as creative agents of positive change in their communities. Standing on my deck one evening in August, watching the sunset paint the ocean in brilliant colors while Tom and Michael explored tide pools below, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected path that had brought me to this moment. The foundation was thriving, the community had embraced our programming, and I was building relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. I thought about Dad's letter, about his belief that I possessed quiet strength and the ability to create beauty in ordinary moments. For the first time, I understood that his gift hadn't just been money or property. He'd given me permission to trust my own instincts, to believe that love expressed through service could be both generous and empowering. The person I'd become in Cannon Beach wasn't entirely different from who I'd been in Portland. I was still someone who found meaning in helping others discover their creative potential. But now that generosity flowed from abundance rather than obligation, from confidence rather than the need to prove my worth through self-sacrifice. As Tom and Michael climbed back up the path, both of them sandy and windblown and happy, I realized that the most valuable inheritance my parents had given me wasn't just the foundation or even the freedom to follow my dreams. They'd given me the courage to believe I was worthy of love that didn't require me to earn it through perfection or performance. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I belonged, with people who saw and valued the person I actually was, rather than the person I thought I should be. 2 years after that life-changing day in Mr. Davidson's office, I stood in my workshop watching 20 local teenagers put finishing touches on their final projects for our summer intensive program. The space buzzed with focused energy as students applied glazes to ceramic pieces, adjusted lighting on photography installations, and practiced presentations they'd give to community members that evening. Maria, a 17-year-old from Tillamook, was completing a series of paintings that documented her grandmother's stories about immigrating from El Salvador. Next to her, Brandon from Astoria worked on a wooden sculpture inspired by traditional fishing techniques his grandfather had taught him. These weren't just art projects. They were bridges between generations, conversations between past and future that honored both heritage and innovation. "Miss Sophia, can you look at this?" Emma, now 10 and one of our most dedicated workshop participants, tugged on my sleeve. She'd been helping with the summer program as a junior mentor, and her confidence had blossomed in ways that amazed everyone who knew her. She led me to a collaborative mural the younger children had created, depicting the coastal ecosystem with fantastical creatures that represented different environmental challenges and solutions. Emma had painted a sea otter holding a paintbrush, surrounded by cleaned-up ocean waters. "We wanted to show that art can help heal the ocean," she explained seriously, "like how you helped heal our community by bringing everyone together to make beautiful things." Her words caught me off guard, not because they weren't true, but because they reminded me how much had changed since I'd first arrived in Cannon Beach, feeling lost and uncertain about my purpose. The foundation now served 8 schools across 3 counties. Our advisory council had grown to include representatives from tribal communities, immigrant families, and rural towns that had previously had no access to arts programming. But the real measure of success wasn't in our expansion, or our budget, or the awards we'd received from state education organizations. It was in moments like this, when children felt empowered to see themselves as creative problem solvers, when families discovered joy in learning together, when communities strengthened through shared artistic experiences. That evening, the final presentation showcase took place in our main gallery space, which had been transformed to display student work alongside professional pieces by local artists. Tom helped set up the sound system while Michael, now 9 and one of Emma's most devoted followers, arranged chairs for the expected crowd. Marcus had driven down from Portland for the event, bringing Elena and her family, who were visiting from Denver. Watching my siblings navigate the gallery space, meeting students and their families, asking thoughtful questions about artistic techniques and community impact, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving myself and everything to do with sharing something I loved with people I cared about. "Dad would be incredibly proud," Elena said quietly, standing next to a display case containing Emma's ceramic pieces from her 3 years of participation, "not just of what you've built, but of who you've become in the process." Marcus nodded, studying a photograph that captured the joy on children's faces during one of our family workshops. "I've been thinking about what he wrote in that letter, about quiet love being the most valuable inheritance. I understand now what he meant." "What do you mean?" "He didn't give you money and property because he thought you needed saving. He gave you resources because he recognized you already possessed the qualities that matter most. The generosity, the patience, the ability to see potential in others. He just wanted to amplify what was already there." As the presentations began, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought me to this moment. The frightened woman who'd sat in that lawyer's office 2 years ago, convinced she'd been forgotten by her own parents, had been transformed not by inheriting wealth, but by learning to trust her own instincts and value her own contributions. The summer program students presented their projects with confidence and eloquence that moved many audience members to tears. Maria shared how exploring her grandmother's stories through art had helped her understand her own identity as a bridge between cultures. Brandon explained how learning traditional woodworking techniques had connected him to his community's maritime heritage, while inspiring him to pursue environmental engineering. But the presentation that affected me most deeply came from Sarah Kim, David's daughter, who is now 14 and had been with our program since the beginning. When I first started coming to these workshops, I thought art was something you were either good at or bad at, she said, standing confidently in front of a mixed media piece that incorporated photography, natural materials, and written poetry. But Miss Sophia taught me that art is really about paying attention to the world around you and finding ways to share what you notice with other people. She paused, looking directly at me. She also taught me that the most important art happens when people create things together, when families learn alongside each other, when communities support each other's creativity. That's the kind of artist I want to be. After the formal presentations ended and families began to mingle, examining artwork and sharing stories, Tom found me on the deck overlooking the ocean. "Successful evening," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we watched the sun begin to set over the Pacific. "Beyond my wildest dreams," I replied, leaning back against his warmth. "I have something to ask you," he said, and something in his tone made me turn to face him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, clearly handmade with the kind of careful attention to detail that characterized everything he created. "Michael helped me make this," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring set with a piece of sea glass worn smooth by decades of ocean waves. "We both think it's time to make our family official." My throat tightened with emotion as I looked at the ring, at Tom's hopeful face, at Michael visible through the gallery windows enthusiastically explaining his latest art project to Elena's children. "Tom, yes, absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about all the different ways people inherit the things that matter most. I'd inherited money and property from my parents, but I'd also inherited their capacity for love, their belief in the importance of serving others, their understanding that the most valuable gifts are often given quietly and without expectation of recognition. I'd inherited a community that had taught me the difference between charity and partnership, between helping and collaborating. I'd inherited relationships with children who'd shown me that creativity flourishes when it's nurtured with patience and genuine respect. Most importantly, I'd inherited the knowledge that love multiplies when it's freely shared, that purpose deepens when it serves something larger than personal satisfaction, that belonging grows stronger when it includes rather than excludes. 6 months later, Tom and I were married in the Foundation's garden space, surrounded by families who'd become our chosen community and children who'd taught us that the most beautiful creations emerge from authentic collaboration. Emma served as our ring bearer, walking carefully down the aisle with Michael as they carried our rings in a ceramic bowl she'd made specifically for the occasion. Marcus officiated the ceremony, having gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding. Elena read a poem she'd written about the different ways love takes root and flourishes. But the moment that moved me most was when David Kim offered a blessing that captured everything I'd learned about inheritance and belonging. "May your love create space for others to flourish," he said. "May your partnership strengthen the communities you serve. May your family, however it grows and changes, always remember that the most valuable inheritance is the ability to love generously and create beauty together." Standing there surrounded by the people who'd become my chosen family, looking out at the ocean that had taught me about persistence and transformation, I understood finally what my father had known all along. The most precious things we inherit aren't material possessions, but the capacity to love others well, to create beauty in ordinary moments, and to trust that our quiet contributions matter more than we might ever realize. The Foundation continues to grow and evolve, adapting to serve new communities and address emerging needs. Tom and I are expecting our first child together, and Michael is excitedly preparing to become a big brother. Emma has started teaching younger children in our workshops, passing on the skills and confidence she's developed through years of creative exploration. But the real legacy isn't measured in programs served or funds distributed. It's measured in moments of connection, in children who've learned to trust their own creative instincts, in families who've discovered joy in making things together, in communities that have grown stronger through shared artistic experiences. Sometimes the most transformative inheritances are the ones that teach us who we were meant to be all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.